Sometimes the most dangerous text message is the one sent to the wrong person. Ava Brooks tasted blood where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek. Her body curled against the cold bathroom tiles of apartment 4C while rain hammered against the fire escape outside. The cheap overhead light flickered every few seconds, buzzing like it was struggling to stay alive along with her. Her right leg throbbed so badly she could barely breathe through it, sharp waves of pain shooting upward every time she tried to move even an inch. The apartment smelled like stale beer, burned takeout containers, and the cologne Derek wore whenever he wanted to pretend he was sorry. Somewhere beyond the cracked bathroom door, the television mumbled low through the apartment living room. Derek had fallen asleep on the couch almost 20 minutes ago, one arm hanging over the edge, whiskey bottle balanced against his chest like tonight had exhausted him more than it exhausted her. Ava pressed a shaking hand over her mouth to stop the sound threatening to escape her throat. She'd learned that lesson months ago. Quiet survived longer. Her phone trembled weakly in her hand, the screen smeared from wet fingertips as she unlocked it for the 5th time. She didn't even remember picking it up off the floor. All she knew was that she needed someone. Anyone. Her older sister lived 3 states away in Atlanta. Her coworkers thought she kept bruising herself because she was clumsy. The neighbors had stopped knocking months ago. People in Queens learned quickly when not to get involved. Ava opened her messages, blinking hard against tears that distorted the glowing screen. Her thumb hovered over Vanessa's name. She typed slowly because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. He broke my leg. The words stared back at her, small and pathetic and horrifying all at once. Ava swallowed hard, then hit send. For a second, nothing happened. Then her stomach dropped. The message thread at the top of the screen wasn't Vanessa. It was an unknown number she'd accidentally saved 2 weeks ago after a delivery driver kept texting updates about someone else's order. Her breath caught. No, 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 she whispered under her breath, instantly trying to unsend the message, but the signal inside the apartment lagged. 3 gray dots appeared instead. Someone was typing back. Ava froze completely. Outside the bathroom door, Derek shifted on the couch cushions, muttering something in his sleep. The television volume crackled louder for a moment before settling again. The typing bubbles disappeared. Then came the reply. Who did this to you? Ava stared at the message, confused. The number had a New York area code. No name. No photo. Just those 5 words sitting cold against the brightness of the screen. She should have ignored it. She knew that. But pain and fear made people reckless. Her fingers moved before her brain could stop them. My boyfriend. Another pause. Longer this time. The rain battered harder against the windows. Somewhere downstairs, a car alarm chirped once and died. Then the stranger responded again. Is he still inside the apartment? Ava's pulse quickened. Something about the message felt wrong. Not concerned. Not emotional. Controlled. Precise. Like the sender already knew the answer and only needed confirmation. She looked toward the bathroom door, barely open an inch. Through the crack, she could see the dim blue glow of the TV flickering across the hallway wall. Derek was still there. Still asleep. Still between her and the front door. Ava typed one word. Yes. The reply came instantly this time. Lock the bathroom door. I'm coming. Ava stared at the final message until the words blurred together on the cracked screen. Lock the bathroom door. I am coming. Fear crawled slowly up her spine, colder than the tile beneath her skin. The stranger did not ask for her address. He did not ask who she was. He wrote those 3 words like he already knew where to find her. Her thumb hovered shakily above the keyboard. Who are you? The response arrived before she could even steady her breathing. Someone awake. The bathroom suddenly felt smaller. The buzzing overhead light flickered again, throwing uneven shadows across the peeling walls and water-stained ceiling. Ava forced herself upright against the sink cabinet, biting down hard as pain shot through her leg. Every movement felt wrong. Outside the door, the television volume lowered abruptly. Her entire body went still. Derek was awake. She could hear the familiar creak of the couch cushions shifting beneath his weight, then the slow, heavy footsteps moving across the apartment floor. Not rushing. Never rushing. Derek always moved slowly after nights like this, calm in a way that terrified her more than yelling ever did. Ava quickly silenced her phone and pressed it against her chest. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom. A soft knock tapped against the wood. Baby. Derek's voice sounded rough with sleep and whiskey. What are you doing in there? Ava squeezed her eyes shut. The stranger's message echoed in her mind. Lock the bathroom door. Her fingers trembled as she quietly reached upward and turned the small brass lock beside the handle. The clicks sounded deafening. Silence followed on the other side. Then another knock. Slightly harder this time. Ava. She forced her voice steady. I got sick. Derek exhaled heavily. She could picture him rubbing his jaw the way he always did when trying to decide whether to apologize or get angry again. Come out so we can talk. Talk. The word twisted painfully in her stomach. That was always the word he used afterward. Not argument. Not fight. Not accident. Just talk. Ava glanced back at her phone. No new messages. For a brief second, she wondered if the stranger had changed his mind. If maybe reality had finally returned and he realized this situation was none of his business. Then another text appeared. Do not open the door. Her pulse jumped violently. Almost immediately another message followed. How long has he been hurting you? Ava swallowed hard. Rainwater streaked against the tiny bathroom window above the tub, blurring the neon lights outside into smeared colors. Her fingers moved before she could stop them. Almost a year. The typing bubble appeared instantly. Again, controlled. Calm. Has he threatened to kill you? Ava stared at the question for several seconds. Outside, Derek leaned lightly against the bathroom door. She could hear the soft scrape of his sleeve against the wood. I said I am sorry, he muttered through the door, quieter now. You know I get stressed. Ava felt tears burn behind her eyes, hot and humiliating. Her entire apartment suddenly felt divided into two terrifying worlds. On one side of the door stood the man she knew too well. On the other side of her phone waited someone she knew nothing about. Yet somehow the stranger frightened her differently. Derek's anger was messy and emotional and loud. But the man texting her felt cold enough to freeze the air itself. Ava finally typed one word. Yes. This time the reply took longer. Long enough for Derek to knock again, harder now. Long enough for Ava to hear the storm outside growing heavier over Queens. Then the message finally appeared. If he touches that door again, answer me immediately. Another message followed beneath it. I am 5 minutes away. 32 floors above Manhattan. Kong Min-jae sat perfectly still while a man twice his age begged for mercy across a marble table worth more than most New Yorkers made in a year. The private lounge inside Black Orchid Club glowed with low amber lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-soaked skyline. Jazz hummed softly through hidden speakers. Crystal glasses reflected gold against polished black stone. Everything about the room whispered wealth, power, control. And yet nobody inside dared breathe too loudly. Min-jae rested one hand against the arm of his chair, dark suit immaculate despite the long night. Silver watch gleaming faintly beneath the cuff. His expression had not changed once in the past 15 minutes. Not when the older man started sweating through his designer shirt. Not when one of Min-jae's men quietly placed photographs across the table. Not even when the man's voice cracked in panic. I can explain, the man whispered desperately. It was not supposed to happen like that. Min-jae's dark eyes remained fixed on him without emotion. Cold. Focused. Almost detached. People feared shouting. They feared rage. But men like Kong Min-jae terrified people because they never needed either. He looked down briefly at the photographs scattered across the marble. Missing money. Private meetings. Betrayal wrapped in expensive suits and fake loyalty. The older man continued talking too fast now, words tumbling over each other. Please. I have children. Silence answered him. Then a phone vibrated softly against the table beside Min-jae's hand. Every person in the room immediately stopped moving. The bodyguard nearest the door lowered his eyes toward the floor. Even the man begging for forgiveness fell silent mid-sentence. Min-jae never allowed interruptions during business meetings. Never. But tonight, the vibration came from a second phone. A private one. Almost nobody had the number. Min-jae glanced down casually at the screen. Then everything about him changed. It was small at first. So small another person might not notice. The slightest tightening near his jaw. The faint stillness that suddenly swallowed the room harder than before. He stared at the message for several seconds without blinking. He broke my leg. Nobody spoke. Rain rolled slowly down the massive windows behind him, smearing the city lights into streaks of silver and gold. Min-jae read the message again. Then again. Somewhere deep beneath years of discipline and control, Something old shifted painfully awake. A memory he spent years trying to bury. A girl crying softly into a phone. A trembling voice saying she was fine when she clearly was not. 11 minutes. That was how late he had arrived back then. 11 minutes too late to change anything. Min-jae slowly stood from his chair. The older man across the table looked relieved for half a second, thinking the conversation might be over. Then Min-jae picked up his coat with calm precision. "We are done here," he said quietly. Nobody asked questions. His men immediately moved aside as he walked toward the exit, phone still in his hand. Another message appeared on the screen. "Yes." Min-jae's eyes darkened slightly. He pressed a button on the phone. "Ji-hoon." The response came instantly through the speaker. "Yes, boss. Trace this number." Min-jae stepped into the private elevator, the city glowing behind him like fire beneath rain clouds. Queen's location. Fast. A short pause followed. Keyboard clicking echoed faintly through the line. Then Ji-hoon spoke again, confusion slipping into his voice. "Boss, this is not one of ours." "I know." The elevator doors closed softly around him. Stainless steel reflected his emotionless face back like cold glass. "That is why I am leaving now." Another text appeared on the screen before the elevator reached the garage level. The sender's name still unknown. The message short, simple, terrified. He says he is sorry. For the first time all night, Kang Min-jae closed his eyes. The black Mercedes moved through Queens like a shadow beneath the rain, silent tires cutting across wet pavement while midnight washed the city in reflections of neon and broken streetlights. Kang Min-jae sat alone in the back seat, one hand resting against his phone while passing storefronts blurred beyond the tinted glass. Corner delis, flickering laundromats, closed liquor stores protected by metal shutters and tired security cameras. The kind of neighborhood wealthy men only pass through with locked doors and armed escorts. Across from him, Ji-hoon worked quietly on a tablet, tracing security feeds and building records with the speed of someone who understood mistakes were expensive around men like Min-jae. Apartment 4C, Ji-hoon said carefully. Building owner has 6 complaints for disturbances in the past year. Same unit. Min-jae did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on Ava's last message glowing against the dark screen in his hand. He says he is sorry. The words settled heavily inside the car. Familiar. Poisonously familiar. Apologies always came after. Flowers came after. Tears came after. Fear came after. But by then the damage already existed. Rain slid slowly down the window beside him, and for one brief moment another face appeared there instead of his own. A young woman with tired eyes and trembling hands. Min-seo. His younger sister had smiled exactly like that in photographs during the final year of her life. Small smiles. Careful smiles. The kind people practiced when they spent too much time pretending everything was normal. Min-jae had ignored the signs back then because he was building an empire and convincing himself power could solve problems later. Later never came. He still remembered the final voicemail she left him at 1:12 in the morning. Her voice barely audible beneath crying. He did not mean it. She whispered into the recording. "I just made him angry again." 11 minutes later, Min-jae arrived at her apartment with 6 men and enough weapons to start a war. But silence had greeted him instead. Silence and flashing ambulance lights reflecting red against rain-covered concrete. Since then, apologies sounded different to him. Not softer, more dangerous. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Ava. "I think he knows something is wrong." Min-jae typed immediately. "Is the bathroom still locked?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then returned again. "Yes." Outside the car, thunder rolled low above the city skyline. Ji-hoon glanced up from the tablet. "Boss, should I notify the others?" Min-jae slid the phone into his palm slowly. "No police. I understand. No unnecessary attention either." Ji-hoon hesitated briefly. "And the boyfriend?" The question hung inside the car. The driver kept his eyes fixed forward. Nobody moved. Min-jae finally looked out the window again as the Mercedes turned onto Ava's block. Rain hammered harder now, flooding gutters and drenching the rows of old brick apartment buildings stacked shoulder to shoulder beneath flickering street lamps. One building stood darker than the others. Half the windows black, paint peeling near the entrance. Security buzzer broken. "There," Ji-hoon said quietly. Min-jae studied the 4th-floor window glowing faintly above the fire escape. Somewhere inside that apartment sat a terrified stranger, holding together what remained of her courage with shaking hands and a dying phone battery. He did not know her age, did not know what she looked like, did not know why she stayed with a man who frightened her. But he understood fear when it became routine. That was the problem. Fear became normal long before people realized they were trapped. His phone vibrated one final time. The message was shorter now, simpler. He is coming toward the bathroom again. Min-jae opened the car door before the vehicle fully stopped. Cold rain immediately soaked the shoulders of his black coat as his polished shoes touched the flooded curb. Above him, thunder cracked across the sky while the fourth-floor bathroom light flickered once through the storm. Ava pressed both trembling hands against the bathroom door as another knock rattled through the thin wood. Harder this time, more impatient. The cheap brass lock clicked softly beneath the pressure, sounding fragile enough to snap apart if Derek leaned against it one more time. Ava. His voice no longer sounded sleepy. It sounded annoyed. Dangerous in the quiet way she hated most. Open the door. Rain battered the apartment windows while thunder rolled low over Queens, shaking the old pipes hidden inside the walls. The television had gone silent now. No background noise. No distractions. Just Derek standing outside and her own heartbeat pounding painfully inside her ears. Ava looked down at her phone again. The battery had dropped to 9%. Her fingers slipped slightly against the cracked screen as she typed. He is angry now. 3 dots appeared immediately. Keep talking to me. Something about those 4 words nearly broke her apart. Not because they were comforting. They were not. The stranger still frightened her. Every message from him carried the same cold certainty that made her feel like she was speaking to someone capable of terrible things without losing sleep afterward. But his replies were immediate. Focused. Steady. Nobody had stayed steady for her in a very long time. Another knock slammed against the bathroom door. Do not ignore me. Derek's voice sharpened. Ava flinched violently. Pain shot through her leg again, forcing a strained gasp from her throat before she could stop it. Silence followed outside the door. Then softer footsteps. Closer now. Baby. Derek's tone shifted instantly, smoother and lower, the same voice he used in restaurants and around friends. Are you hurt worse than I thought? Ava squeezed her eyes shut. The manipulation would have worked once. Months ago, she would have unlocked the door simply because he sounded worried. That was the cruel part about men like Derek. They did not stay monsters every second. They became kind exactly long enough to confuse you. Her phone vibrated again. Is he speaking softly now? Ava stared down at the message, stunned. Yes. The reply came instantly. That means he is losing control. Her pulse quickened. Outside, Derek rested his forehead lightly against the door. She could hear his breathing now through the thin wood separating them. I said I am sorry, he murmured. You know I would never really hurt you. Ava looked down at the dark bruise forming across her wrist and felt something cold settle into her stomach. The worst lies were always spoken gently. Suddenly another sound echoed faintly from outside the building below. Car doors closing. Multiple. Heavy enough to make Ava glance toward the tiny bathroom window above the tub. Rain blurred most of the street beneath her 4th-floor apartment, but through the streaked glass, she could barely make out 3 black vehicles parked beside the curb. Long, expensive. Out of place in this neighborhood. Her breathing stopped completely. The stranger texted again before she could react. Stay where you are. Ava's fingers trembled harder now. Who are you? Several seconds passed this time. Long enough for Derek to jiggle the bathroom handle again. Long enough for thunder to crack violently outside. Then the message finally appeared on the glowing screen. Someone he should be afraid of. At almost the exact same moment, a loud buzzing sound echoed through the apartment. The downstairs entrance intercom. Derek stepped away from the bathroom immediately. Ava heard his footsteps moving toward the living room. Who the hell is here at this hour? He muttered angrily. The intercom buzzed again. Once. Calm. Deliberate. Then Ava's phone lit up with one final message. Open nothing. Say nothing. I am already inside the building. The apartment fell unnaturally quiet after Derek walked away from the bathroom door. Ava could hear him moving through the living room now, his footsteps slower than before, cautious in a way that immediately made her stomach tighten. Derek was not a brave man. Loud, yes. Cruel sometimes. But courage disappeared quickly when uncertainty entered the room. The old floorboards creaked beneath his weight as he approached the front entrance. Rain hammered against the windows hard enough to drown out most city noise, but Ava still caught the faint mechanical hum of the building elevator stopping somewhere nearby. Fourth floor. Her chest tightened painfully. The stranger had not been lying. He really came. Ava looked down at her phone again, the dim glow illuminating her shaking fingers in the dark bathroom. 7% battery remaining. Another message appeared. Do not come out unless I tell you to. Her breathing became shallow. Every instinct screamed that she should call the police instead. That no normal person arrived this quickly in the middle of a storm. That no safe person spoke with such terrifying calm. But another part of her understood something worse. Men like Derek feared consequences only when they came from someone stronger. A sharp buzz echoed through the apartment as Derek pressed the intercom button beside the front door. Yeah, he snapped. Silence answered him for 2 full seconds. Then a man's voice came calmly through the speaker. Delivery. Ava frowned in confusion. Derek did too apparently, because his voice sharpened immediately. What delivery? For Ava Brooks. The bathroom suddenly felt ice cold. Derek laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. It is almost 2 in the morning. I am aware. Calm. Deep. Controlled. Ava froze completely. Even distorted through the old intercom speaker, she recognized the voice immediately. The stranger. Derek hesitated near the door. Ava could almost picture the expression on his face now, confused irritation beginning to shift into discomfort. Look, man, you got the wrong apartment. Apartment 4C. The voice remained perfectly even. No mistake. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Then the stranger spoke again. Open the door, Derek. Ava stopped breathing entirely. The sound of her boyfriend's name hanging inside the apartment changed everything. She heard Derek take a step backward from the entrance. Who the hell are you? No answer came immediately. Only rain against windows. Elevator cables groaning faintly somewhere beyond the hallway walls. Then the voice returned softer than before. Somehow that made it worse. Open the door. The front deadbolt unlocked with a nervous metallic click. Ava pressed herself harder against the bathroom sink cabinet, pulse hammering violently in her throat. Outside, the apartment door slowly opened. Silence flooded in first. Then footsteps. Slow. Measured. Expensive shoes against cheap apartment flooring. More than one person entered. Ava could feel it somehow, even without seeing them. The entire energy inside the apartment shifted. Derek noticed it too. Listen, man. He started quickly, voice unsteady now. I think there is some misunderstanding here. Nobody answered him at first. Ava imagined dark coats dripping rainwater onto the cracked linoleum floor. Broad shoulders filling the tiny apartment entrance. Men too calm to belong in places like this. Her phone vibrated again in her hand. Stay inside. Then another message appeared beneath it. Are you alone in the bathroom? Ava typed carefully with trembling fingers. Yes. Several seconds passed. Outside the bathroom door, the apartment had gone terrifyingly still. No television. No footsteps. No yelling. Just silence, so complete Ava could hear rainwater dripping from somewhere near the kitchen sink. Then for the first time since opening the front door, Derek spoke again. Except now his voice sounded smaller. Wait. I know who you are. Another pause followed. Long enough to make Ava's stomach twist painfully. Then the stranger finally answered him. Then you understand why you should step away from that bathroom door. Ava held her breath, so long her lungs began to ache. Outside the bathroom door, nobody moved. Nobody raised their voice. The silence spreading through the apartment felt heavier than screaming ever could. Rain crashed against the windows while thunder rolled low over Queens. But inside apartment 4C, every sound suddenly seemed distant compared to the terrifying stillness in her living room. Derek spoke first again, his voice unsteady now. I did not know she contacted anybody. No response came immediately. Ava stared at the bathroom door, pulse hammering violently inside her chest, as she imagined Kong Min-jae standing in the middle of the apartment with that same terrifying calm she heard through the intercom. She still had not seen his face. Somehow that made him worse. Interesting, Min-jae finally said softly. Ava shivered at the sound of his voice, so close now. Not loud, not angry, controlled in a way that made every word feel carefully sharpened. Derek swallowed audibly. Look, man, whatever she said, couples fight sometimes. It is not what it looks like. Another silence followed. Ava's phone vibrated gently against her palm. Are you able to stand at all? Her fingers trembled as she typed back. Barely. The reply came instantly. Stay ready anyway. Outside the bathroom, Derek continued talking too fast now. She is emotional. She exaggerates things when she gets upset. Ava closed her eyes painfully. Emotional. Dramatic. Sensitive. Derek always used words that sounded harmless enough to confuse people listening from the outside. Min-jae spoke again before she could spiral deeper into those thoughts. Did you break her leg? The apartment went silent. Completely silent. Ava could almost feel Derek calculating his answer. It was an accident. Min-jae did not respond right away. Then came the soft sound of shoes moving slowly across the apartment floor. Deliberate. Measured. Ava imagined him studying everything inside the room now. The overturned lamp near the couch. The shattered picture frame still lying beside the kitchen counter. Her purse dumped onto the floor. Fear left fingerprints everywhere once you knew how to recognize it. An accident, Min-jae repeated quietly. Derek forced out a nervous laugh. Yeah, she slipped. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Min-jae asked the question that changed the air inside the apartment completely. Then why is she hiding from you? Ava's throat tightened painfully. Derek did not answer immediately because there was no answer for that. Outside the bathroom door, tension spread like smoke through the tiny apartment. Even without seeing them, Ava could sense the other men standing somewhere near the entrance in total silence. Watching. Waiting. Professional. Nobody interrupted their boss. Nobody needed to. Derek tried again, but the confidence was gone from his voice now. Listen, I do not want problems. You already have them. Min-jae's tone never changed. That somehow made the words colder. Ava heard Derek take a nervous step backward. Then another. Floorboards creaked softly beneath his weight. Who even are you? He whispered. This time one of the other men answered instead, voice calm and emotionless from somewhere near the front door. You should stop asking questions. Thunder cracked violently outside, rattling the apartment windows hard enough to make Ava flinch. Her phone vibrated once more. Open the bathroom when I tell you. Fear twisted sharply through her stomach again. The stranger who texted her through the night no longer felt distant or abstract. He was standing only feet away now. Real. Dangerous. Powerful enough to make Derek sound terrified for the first time since she met him. Then Ava heard something else she never thought she would hear inside that apartment. Derek apologizing. Look, I messed up, okay? His voice cracked slightly. I was drinking. I lost my temper. It will not happen again. Silence answered him. Cold silence. Then Min-jae finally spoke one last time. That sentence has buried more women than storms ever will. Ava did not realize she was crying until tears slipped silently down her cheeks onto the glowing screen in her hands. The bathroom felt smaller with every second, the flickering overhead light casting pale shadows across the cracked mirror while rain pounded against the tiny window above the bathtub. Outside the door, nobody argued anymore. Nobody shouted. The apartment had fallen into a silence so tense it no longer felt human. Ava could hear Derek breathing unevenly in the living room. She had never heard fear in his voice before tonight. Not real fear. Her phone vibrated softly again. Unlocked the bathroom door. Her entire body stiffened immediately. No. Every instinct inside her screamed no. She barely knew this man. He arrived in the middle of the night with strangers in black coats and somehow knew Derek's full name before stepping inside the apartment. Men like that did not belong to normal worlds. Men like that belonged in headlines people whispered about and avoided discussing too loudly in public restaurants. Ava stared at the message without moving. Another appeared beneath it. Nobody will touch you again tonight. The certainty in those words frightened her more than threats ever could. Outside, Derek spoke suddenly, voice tight and strained. Please, just leave. Silence answered him for several long seconds. Then Min-jae spoke quietly. You are confusing me with someone asking permission. Ava closed her eyes. Even through the bathroom wall, his voice carried the same terrifying calm that made every word feel final. Another message appeared on her screen. Ava, open the door. Seeing her name, there made her stomach twist sharply. She never told him her name directly. Somehow he found it anyway. Of course he did. Men like Kang Min-jae probably found anything they wanted. Her trembling fingers slowly reached toward the brass lock. She hesitated only once before turning it softly. The click echoed loudly in the tiny bathroom. Outside, silence deepened. Ava pushed the door open barely 2 inches at first. The apartment beyond looked darker than before, lit only by the kitchen light and flashes of distant lightning outside the windows. Derek stood near the couch now, pale and sweating beneath the dim light. But Ava barely noticed him. Her eyes locked immediately onto the stranger standing in the middle of her apartment. Kong Min-jae looked nothing like the men she knew. He wore a black wool coat still damp from rain. Dark hair swept neatly away from a sharp face, completely untouched by panic or anger. His posture remained perfectly relaxed despite the tension swallowing the room. Beside him stood two silent men in tailored suits, motionless near the apartment entrance like statues guarding a king. But it was Min-jae's eyes that unsettled her most. Calm, dark, focused entirely on her the second the bathroom door moved. He looked at the bruise on her wrist first, then the way she leaned heavily against the sink to keep weight off her injured leg. His expression never changed. Somehow that made her feel even more exposed. Derek tried speaking again. She just needs a doctor. This does not have to become. Min-jae lifted one hand slightly without even looking at him. Derek stopped talking immediately. The room went still again. Ava realized then that power did not always sound loud. Sometimes real power barely needed to speak at all. Min-jae finally stepped closer to the bathroom doorway, slow enough not to startle her. Up close, he smelled faintly like rainwater, cedar cologne, and cold winter air. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Ava swallowed hard. Nobody had asked her that all night. Not if she deserved it. Not why she stayed. Just whether she could walk. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Not really." Min-jae nodded once. Then he removed his coat calmly and held it toward her instead of touching her directly. "Wrap this around yourself," he said softly. "You are shaking." Ava stared at the black coat in Kong Min-jae's hand for several long seconds before finally taking it. The fabric felt heavy and expensive against her trembling fingers, still warm from his body heat despite the cold rain outside. She wrapped it shakily around her shoulders, immediately swallowed by the scent of cedar, smoke, and winter air clinging to the material. Somehow that only made everything feel less real. This kind of thing did not happen to women like her. Men like Kong Min-jae did not walk into broken apartments at 2 in the morning to help strangers. Men like him belonged in stories people whispered about online and quickly stopped discussing when someone else entered the room. Ava carefully shifted her weight against the sink cabinet, trying not to cry out as pain pulsed sharply through her leg again. Min-jae noticed immediately. His eyes dropped briefly toward the swelling near her ankle before lifting back to her face. "You need a hospital." Ava nodded weakly but did not move. Leaving the bathroom suddenly felt terrifying. Derek still stood only a few feet away near the couch, pale beneath the kitchen light. For the first time since she met him, he looked small. Not physically, emotionally, like someone realizing the rules inside the room no longer belonged to him. "Ava," Derek said carefully, trying to sound calm again. "You do not have to go anywhere with these people." These people. The phrase hung awkwardly in the apartment. One of the men near the door glanced at Derek with faint amusement before looking away again. Min-jae did not even acknowledge the comment. His attention remained entirely on Ava. "Can you stand if someone helps you?" Ava hesitated. Every warning her mother ever gave her screamed inside her head. Do not trust strange men. Do not follow dangerous people. Do not disappear into somebody else's car in the middle of the night. But then she looked at Derek. Really looked at him. At the apartment behind him with broken picture frames and stained walls and years of fear soaked into every corner. Staying suddenly felt more dangerous than leaving. "I think so," she whispered. Min-jae nodded once toward the man standing nearest the entrance. "Ji-hoon." The bodyguard stepped forward immediately, calm and professional. Unlike Derek, he moved carefully around her injury without touching her more than necessary. Ava winced sharply as she shifted her weight upright, gripping the bathroom doorway for balance, while Ji-hoon steadied her arm. Pain shot upward through her leg hard enough to blur her vision for a moment. Min-jae watched silently the entire time. Not impatient, not overly sympathetic either. Just focused, controlled. Dangerous men were usually loud in movies. Cruel, dramatic. But Kong Min-jae scared her because he seemed perfectly calm while everyone else around him unraveled. Derek tried one last time, as Ava limped slowly into the living room. "You are really leaving with them?" His voice cracked slightly. "You do not even know who he is." Ava stopped moving for half a second. Rain streaked across the apartment windows behind Min-jae, while distant thunder rolled over the city. The room smelled faintly of wet pavement and expensive cologne now instead of whiskey and fear. She looked at Derek standing beside the couch, where she once believed apologies meant love. Then she looked toward Kong Min-jae, the stranger who frightened her almost as much as he fascinated her. "No," Ava whispered honestly. "But I know who you are." Silence swallowed the apartment after that. Derek's face tightened, humiliation flashing briefly across his expression before fear swallowed it again. Min-jae finally spoke without taking his eyes off Ava. "Bring her downstairs." Ji-hoon nodded immediately. As Ava limped carefully toward the apartment door, she glanced back only once. Derek remained frozen beside the couch, while Kong Min-jae stood motionless in the middle of the room, rainwater still dripping slowly from the edges of his dark coat, sleeves onto the cracked apartment floor. Neither man spoke another word. But somehow Ava understood something terrifying in that silence. Derek's night was not over yet. The emergency room waiting area smelled like disinfectant, burnt coffee, and exhaustion. Ava sat curled beneath Kong Min-jae's black coat, while nurses moved quickly through the brightly lit hallway around her, their sneakers squeaking softly against polished floors as thunder rumbled faintly outside the hospital windows. Everything since leaving the apartment felt unreal, like she had stepped out of her own life and into someone else's nightmare. The ride across Queens happened mostly in silence. Nobody in the black SUV asked her questions. Nobody stared. Ji-hoon sat across from her quietly, while another man drove through rain-soaked streets with calm precision. But Kong Min-jae never looked away from her for long. Not in an unsettling way. More like he was making sure she stayed conscious. The doctors confirmed the fracture less than 20 minutes after arrival. Stress fracture near the ankle. Severe swelling. Bruising across her wrist and shoulder. The female doctor asked gentle questions Ava struggled to answer without feeling ashamed. "Has this happened before? Do you feel safe going home tonight?" Ava noticed Min-jae standing near the doorway during most of the conversation, hands folded calmly behind his back, while rainwater from his dark coat dried slowly beneath fluorescent lights. He never interrupted once. Never answered for her. Yet somehow the entire emergency room staff seemed nervous around him anyway. Nurses lowered their voices when walking past him. Security guards glanced twice before quickly looking away. Even the front desk receptionist stopped typing the moment he entered the building. Power followed some people like expensive cologne. Ava finished signing discharge paperwork with trembling fingers nearly 2 hours later. The pain medication made her thoughts feel slower now, softer around the edges. A hospital brace wrapped tightly around her injured leg while crutches rested beside her chair. She looked exhausted in the reflection of the waiting room window. Smudged mascara, tangled curls, bruises she could no longer explain away as accidents even to herself. Across the room, Kong Min-jae sat alone near the vending machines, elbows resting lightly against his knees while his phone glowed dimly in one hand. His posture remained perfectly composed despite the late hour. The expensive black suit beneath his coat looked untouched by the storm outside. He belonged in skyscrapers and private clubs, not emergency rooms in Queens at 4 in the morning. Ava still could not understand why he stayed. Most people would have left after dropping her at the hospital. Most people would have called authorities and disappeared back into their own lives. But Kong Min-jae waded through x-rays, paperwork, medications, and endless fluorescent hours without a single complaint. As if leaving before she was safe simply never crossed his mind. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "Miss Brooks," the nurse smiled gently while handing over discharge instructions. "You should not put pressure on that ankle for at least several weeks." Ava nodded weakly. "Thank you." The nurse glanced briefly toward Min-jae before lowering her voice slightly. "Your husband already handled the paperwork." Ava blinked in confusion. "My what?" "The gentleman waiting with you." Heat rushed instantly into Ava's face. "Oh no, he is not." But the nurse had already moved away toward another patient. Ava turned slowly toward Min-jae across the room. Somehow he must have heard the conversation because one corner of his mouth almost moved. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. More dangerous somehow, because it appeared so rarely. Ava looked away quickly. Her pulse suddenly felt unsteady again for reasons she did not understand. A moment later Min-jae stood and crossed the waiting room. toward her with the same calm confidence that made everyone nearby subtly move aside without realizing they were doing it. He stopped beside her chair, eyes briefly scanning the brace on her ankle before meeting her gaze again. "Can you use the crutches?" Ava nodded carefully. "I think so." "Good." His voice remained low and controlled. "You are not going back to that apartment." Fear twisted unexpectedly through her stomach again. Not fear of Derek this time. Fear of the man standing calmly in front of her like he had already decided the future for both of them. The rain had finally softened into a cold mist by the time Ava left the emergency room on crutches beside Kong Min-jae. Dawn had not arrived yet, but the city no longer felt fully asleep either. Yellow taxi lights slid through wet streets outside the hospital entrance while exhausted nurses traded shifts beneath flickering street lamps. Ava tightened Min-jae's coat around herself as cold air brushed against her face, her injured leg aching sharply with every careful movement down the hospital ramp. Ji-hoon opened the SUV door without a word. The inside of the vehicle glowed softly beneath dim overhead lights, warm enough to make Ava suddenly realize how exhausted she truly was. She hesitated beside the open door. Everything about this still felt insane. 3 hours ago, she had been trapped in a bathroom, terrified her boyfriend might break the door down. Now she stood outside a hospital beside a man powerful enough to make doctors nervous and strangers whisper. Min-jae noticed her hesitation immediately. "You are thinking about running." Ava looked up quickly, startled by how accurately he read her expression. "Maybe." One corner of his mouth moved faintly again. Not amusement exactly. Recognition. "You would fall before you reached the sidewalk." Ava hated that he was probably right. Her grip tightened against the crutches. "I still do not understand why you are doing this." Min-jae glanced briefly toward the waking city beyond the hospital parking lot before answering. "Neither did my sister." The words landed softly between them, different from everything else he had said tonight. Ava studied him, carefully for the first time since leaving the apartment. The sharp lines of his face looked colder beneath the gray hospital lights, exhaustion faintly shadowing his eyes now that the adrenaline had faded. He seemed older suddenly, not physically, emotionally, like carrying something heavy for too many years. Ava spoke quietly. What happened to her? Silence followed at first. Ji-hoon looked away respectfully toward the street while mist drifted across the empty parking lot around them. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly through Queens. Min-jae finally answered without looking at her directly. She married someone who apologized often. Ava's throat tightened immediately. He always sounded sincere afterward. Min-jae continued calmly. Flowers, gifts, promises, tears. His voice never cracked, never changed. Somehow that made the story hurt more. My sister believed if she loved him correctly, he would eventually become the version of himself he pretended to be after hurting her. Ava stared silently at him, unable to move. Rainwater dripped slowly from the edge of the hospital awning beside them. One night, she sent me a message, Min-jae said quietly. She wrote, "He says it is my fault again." For the first time since Ava met him, his eyes seemed somewhere far away from the hospital parking lot, somewhere years behind them both. "I was in Busan handling business," he continued. "I told her I would call when the meeting ended." Ava stopped breathing. She already knew before he finished. "I arrived 11 minutes too late." Silence swallowed the parking lot after that. No dramatic anger, no tears, just cold truth sitting heavily between them beneath the pale city lights. Ava looked down at the cracked hospital bracelet around her wrist and suddenly understood why Kong Min-jae answered a stranger's message in the middle of the night. It was never really about her. Not completely. Somewhere inside him, a brother was still trying to outrun 11 minutes. Min-jae finally looked back toward her again. Expression calm once more, walls rebuilt carefully behind dark eyes. "I do not make the same mistake twice," he said softly. Then he stepped aside, slightly, and held the SUV door open for her. "Get inside, Ava." The penthouse overlooked Manhattan like a world untouched by ordinary pain. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the early morning skyline, while silver clouds drifted slowly above the city, turning the rising sunlight pale and cold against the glass. Ava stood near the entrance in borrowed socks and Kong Min-jae's oversized black sweater, staring silently at a living room larger than her entire apartment building lobby back in Queens. Everything inside felt impossibly quiet. No shouting through walls. No television left running all night. No footsteps making her stomach tighten. Just silence and the faint hum of rain against distant windows high above the city. Ji-hoon placed a cup of tea carefully onto the marble kitchen island before disappearing down the hallway without another word. Even the staff inside the penthouse moved quietly, professionally, like they understood this home belonged to someone dangerous enough that raised voices were unnecessary. Ava wrapped both hands around the warm mug, though she barely drank from it. Exhaustion pulled heavily at her body now that adrenaline had faded away. The pain medication made everything feel dreamlike around the edges. She still expected to wake up back inside apartment 4C at any second. Min-jae stood near the windows with his back partially turned toward her, dark suit jacket removed now, white dress shirt sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He had spent the last 20 minutes on quiet phone calls in Korean while the skyline brightened behind him. Calm conversations. Controlled. Yet every person on the other end sounded nervous enough that even Ava could hear it through the silence between words. No, Min-jae said softly into the phone. He will not contact her again. A pause followed. His expression never changed. Make sure he understands that. The line disconnected moments later. Ava lowered her tea slowly. Fear stirred again deep inside her chest. Not the frantic fear Derek caused. This felt different. Colder. Kang Min-jae did not raise his voice because he did not need to. People obeyed him anyway. Min-jae finally turned away from the windows and crossed the room toward her. Morning light caught faint silver strands hidden within his dark hair, subtle signs that stress had been living inside him longer than she first realized. He placed a small paper bag onto the kitchen island beside her tea. Clothes, he said quietly. The assistant guessed your size. Ava blinked in surprise. Inside the bag sat folded sweatpants, soft shirts, socks, and basic toiletries still carrying store tags. New. Untouched. Purchased in the middle of the night somehow. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had taken care of details for her in years. You did not have to do this, she whispered. Min-jae studied her calmly for a moment. Yes, he replied softly. I did. Silence settled between them again. Ava looked down at the steam rising slowly from her untouched tea. What happens now? She finally asked. The question felt larger than clothing or hospitals or broken apartments. What happened after surviving someone? How did people return to normal when fear became part of their daily routine? Min-jae leaned lightly against the opposite side of the marble island, dark eyes steady on hers. Now you rest. And Derek. The room grew still again. Outside the windows, Manhattan traffic slowly awakened beneath gray skies and rain-polished streets. Min-jae answered carefully. Derek will spend the rest of his life understanding boundaries. Ava stared at him uncertainly. What does that mean? One corner of his mouth shifted faintly again. Not warmth exactly. Something older. Tired. It means, he said quietly, he finally met consequences. Ava should have been horrified by how calm those words sounded. Instead, for the first time in nearly a year, she felt her shoulders slowly loosen beneath the oversized sweater wrapped around her frame. Somewhere deep inside herself, fear had finally stopped screaming long enough for exhaustion to take its place. And sitting across from one of the most dangerous men in New York City, Ava Brooks realized something that would have sounded impossible only hours earlier. She felt safer here than she ever had inside her own home. 3 weeks later, sunlight spilled softly across the marble floors of Kang Min-jae's penthouse, while New York moved restlessly beneath the towering windows far below. The storm that changed Ava Brooks's life had long disappeared from the city skyline. But some mornings, she still woke expecting to hear Derek's footsteps outside a locked bathroom door. Trauma did not vanish just because danger ended. It faded slowly, quietly, like bruises healing beneath skin nobody else could see. Ava adjusted the brace around her ankle carefully before lowering herself onto the balcony chair overlooking Manhattan. Physical therapy had become part of her mornings now. Slow walks, doctor visits, sleepless nights that came less often than before. The fear inside her chest no longer lived there constantly. That alone still felt miraculous. A steaming mug of coffee waited beside her, already prepared exactly the way she liked it, even though she never remembered telling anyone. Somewhere inside the penthouse kitchen, staff moved quietly through another morning while soft jazz drifted faintly through hidden speakers. Peace. Real peace. Ava still was not used to it. The balcony door slid open behind her. Kong Min-jae stepped outside wearing a charcoal suit and black tie, silver cufflinks catching the morning light as he adjusted the sleeve of his coat. Even now, weeks later, his presence still changed the atmosphere around him instantly. Calm, controlled, dangerous in the quietest possible way. But Ava no longer flinched when he entered a room. That might have surprised her most of all. Min-jae crossed the balcony slowly before setting a small box beside her untouched coffee. "Your new phone," he said simply. Ava looked down at the sleek black device resting inside expensive packaging. "You already replaced the last one. This one has private security software installed." Ava laughed softly under her breath. "That sounds terrifying." One corner of Min-jae's mouth shifted faintly. "It is New York." Silence settled comfortably between them after that while morning traffic glimmered below the balcony like rivers of moving light. Ava studied him quietly for a moment before finally asking the question she carried for weeks now. "What happened to Derek?" Min-jae looked out across the skyline instead of directly at her. "He moved out of state." Ava blinked. Just like that. Some people learn quickly when consequences become real. His voice remained calm, but Ava understood now that calmness did not mean softness. Kong Min-jae carried justice differently than ordinary men. Quietly, permanently. Ava lowered her gaze toward the city streets far below. "I used to think powerful people were the ones you should fear most." Min-jae glanced toward her finally. "And now?" Ava thought about the apartment in Queens. About the hospital waiting room at 4 in the morning. About a terrifying stranger who answered a desperate message instead of ignoring it. "Now I think the scariest people are the ones who hurt others and believe nobody will stop them." For the first time since she met him, Min-jae smiled fully. Small, brief, real enough to soften something sharp inside his face before disappearing again. "That," he said quietly, "is a very expensive lesson for some men to learn." Ava looked down at the new phone resting in her lap. Safe, connected, no longer trapped in silence. Weeks ago, she accidentally texted a stranger during the worst night of her life. Somehow, against all reason, the stranger answered. And somewhere beneath the cold skyline of New York City, a man who terrified everyone else became the reason she finally felt safe again. The room behind them remained peaceful. The city kept moving. And for the first time in years, Ava Brooks no longer felt alone. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel so more stories about courage, dignity, and unexpected kindness can reach others who may need them too.